Meeting someone on Tinder can be exciting, but my date took a horrifying turn when he revealed disturbing personal information that I had never shared with him. I had been chatting with this guy, Mike, on Tinder for weeks. He seemed perfect, charming, funny, and interested in all the same things I was. We decided to meet at a cozy local cafe. I was excited and nervous, butterflies in my stomach as I got ready. The cafe was a quaint little place, filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the hum of quiet conversations. It felt like the perfect setting for our first date. When I arrived, Mike was already there, looking exactly like his pictures. We greeted each other with warm smiles and sat down to chat. The conversation flowed easily, and I found myself relaxing, enjoying his company. We talked about our favorite movies, hobbies, and plans for the future. It felt like we had known each other for a long time, and I started to think this could be the beginning of something special. As we continued our conversation, Mike began to mention extremely personal details about my life. He talked about my favorite places to visit in the city, even though I had never told him. He mentioned my childhood pet's name and some of my recent activities that I hadn't shared on Tinder. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. How did he know all this? Trying to keep my composure, I asked him casually how he knew so much about me. He leaned back with a smug smile and said, "I have my ways." The way he said it sent alarm bells ringing in my head. My discomfort grew as he continued to talk, revealing more about my life, things he shouldn't have known. My excitement turned to unease, and I started to feel trapped in this conversation. The conversation took a darker turn when Mike mentioned following all my social media accounts, even the ones I hadn't mentioned to him. He started talking about photos I had posted, places I had checked into, and comments I had made online. My heart pounded in my chest as the realization hit me. This wasn't just a creepy guy. He had been stalking me. Panic set in. I needed to get out of there. I made an excuse about having an early morning the next day and quickly gathered my things. Mike's eyes followed me, and his smile never wavered. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt his gaze burning into my back. I resisted the urge to run, knowing it would only make things worse. I had to stay calm until I was safely away. When I got home, I immediately blocked Mike on all my social media platforms, hoping it would be enough to deter him. I felt a momentary sense of relief, but the unease lingered. I double-checked all my security settings and even considered deleting some accounts altogether. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of my life was online for anyone to see. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump, and I kept checking the locks on my doors and windows. My mind raced with thoughts of what Mike might do next. I kept my phone close, ready to call for help if needed. The feeling of being watched, of having my privacy invaded, was overwhelming. It was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. For weeks, the feeling of being watched haunted me. Every time I left my apartment, I felt eyes on me. My phone would buzz with notifications from new, untraceable social media accounts sending cryptic messages. It was always something about knowing where I was or what I was doing. My anxiety skyrocketed, and I found myself jumping at every sound, every shadow. I changed my routine, hoping to shake off whoever was tracking me, but the messages continued, relentless and invasive. I reported the situation to the police, but with no concrete evidence, they couldn't do much. They advised me to stay vigilant and suggested I get a security system installed. I followed their advice, hoping the cameras would catch something or someone. Despite this, the eerie sensation persisted, gnawing at my sense of security. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, constantly on edge, waiting for the next unsettling message or the feeling of being watched. One evening, I noticed a car parked near my building. It had been there for hours, and the figure inside never moved. My heart pounded as I stared at it from my window. When I finally mustered the courage to confront whoever it was, the car sped off, leaving me more paranoid than ever. I couldn't help but wonder if it was him, my Tinder date, lurking and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The fear was suffocating, and I knew I couldn't live like this indefinitely. In a desperate attempt to regain some sense of normalcy, I started digging deeper into his online presence. I created a fake profile to follow his accounts, hoping to find some clue that would give me leverage or understanding. What I found was far worse than I anticipated. His social media was filled with photos of women, all taken without their knowledge. The comments from his friends were equally disturbing, joking about his collection and how he always knew the right buttons to push. My stomach turned as I realized I wasn't the first victim of his sinister obsession. Each photo had a timestamp and a location, and I could trace his movements across the city, always one step ahead of his prey. The thought of how close he had been to me, how easily he had infiltrated my life, made my skin crawl. I documented everything and took it to the police again, but they said it wasn't enough for a warrant or an arrest. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming. I reached out to the women I could identify in the photos, sharing my story and asking if they had experienced anything similar. Most of them were too scared to respond, but a few did. They told me about the same eerie feeling of being watched, the cryptic messages, the unmarked cars. We decided to form a support group, meeting secretly to share information and offer each other some semblance of comfort. It was a small solace, but at least we weren't alone in this nightmare. With the situation becoming increasingly dire, I decided to seek professional help. A friend recommended a private investigator who specialized in cyberstalking cases. I hesitated at first, unsure if I wanted to escalate things further, but the constant fear pushed me to take action. I met with the investigator, providing all the evidence I had gathered. He assured me he would do everything in his power to uncover the truth and put an end to my torment. The investigator quickly made progress, discovering that my stalker had been using sophisticated techniques to cover his tracks. He found hidden cameras in my apartment, expertly placed to avoid detection. The realization that my privacy had been so thoroughly violated was devastating. I felt exposed and vulnerable, knowing he had been watching my every move. The investigator assured me that he was closing in on the stalker, but it was hard to feel safe. The support group I had formed with the other victims became my lifeline. We shared our fears and frustrations, and some of us even took self-defense classes together. The investigator kept us updated on his progress, but the constant uncertainty was wearing us down. Each day felt like a battle for sanity, a struggle to reclaim our lives from the shadow of this relentless predator. Despite the progress being made, the road to justice seemed interminably long. After weeks of relentless investigation, the private investigator finally had a breakthrough. He discovered the stalker's real identity and location. It turned out that the man I had met on Tinder was using multiple aliases and had a history of similar behavior. Armed with this new information, the investigator coordinated with the police to set up a sting operation. The plan was to catch him in the act, gathering enough evidence for a solid case. The day of the operation, my nerves were frayed. The police had set up surveillance around his apartment, waiting for him to make a move. I was in constant contact with the investigator, who assured me that everything was going according to plan. Hours passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, the moment came. He left his apartment, carrying what appeared to be a new set of hidden cameras. The police moved in, arresting him on the spot. The relief was overwhelming. Knowing that he was in custody and unable to harm anyone else brought a sense of closure I hadn't felt in months. The investigator and the police collected all the evidence, ensuring that he would face severe charges. The media caught wind of the story, and it became a cautionary tale about the dangers of online dating and the importance of digital security. While the ordeal had been harrowing, it was finally over. With the stalker behind bars, I began the long process of healing. The sense of freedom was exhilarating, but the scars of the experience lingered. I continued to attend therapy, working through the trauma and learning to trust again. The support group I had formed became even more vital, as we all leaned on each other for strength and understanding. We celebrated the small victories and supported each other through the setbacks. I became an advocate for online safety, sharing my story with others to raise awareness. Schools, community centers, and online platforms invited me to speak, And I used these opportunities to educate people about the importance of privacy and the dangers of oversharing. The gratitude and support I received from those I helped was incredibly rewarding, giving purpose to the pain I had endured. Each story I heard from others facing similar challenges reinforced my resolve to make a difference. Life gradually returned to normal, but I never forgot the lessons I had learned. I remained vigilant, always aware of my surroundings, and careful about the information I shared online. My relationships grew stronger, built on trust and open communication. The experience had changed me, but it also made me more resilient. I found peace in knowing that I had survived, and that I had the strength to overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. Feeling scared yet? Hold on tight, the next horror awaits. Hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. Story 2. During a seemingly normal Tinder date, I discovered a house filled with chilling secrets that left me questioning my safety and the true identity of my date. I'm Jake, a 29-year-old software developer who enjoys using dating apps to meet new people. My social circle is small, and I often turn to Tinder for companionship and the thrill of new connections. I've had some good experiences and some not so great, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. I matched with a woman named Sarah. She was charming, intelligent, and beautiful. Everything I was looking for. We chatted for weeks, and our conversations were engaging and deep. When she invited me to her house for dinner, I was excited but also a bit nervous. Meeting someone in their home for the first time can be intimidating, but she seemed trustworthy, and I decided to take the plunge. When I pulled up to her house, it was immaculate. The lawn was perfectly manicured, and the house itself had a cozy, inviting look. I knocked on the door, and Sarah greeted me with a warm smile. As I stepped inside, I couldn't shake off a slight feeling of unease, though I couldn't pinpoint why. The interior was just as pristine as the exterior, with tasteful decor and a pleasant aroma wafting from the kitchen. We sat in the living room, chatting over a glass of wine. Sarah seemed a bit nervous, but I chalked it up to first date jitters. However, as the evening went on, her behavior became increasingly bizarre. She would occasionally glance nervously towards the basement door, and her laughter seemed forced. Despite these oddities, I convinced myself that I was overthinking things. Dinner was served, and it was delicious. Roast chicken with all the trimmings. We sat at the dining table, and our conversation flowed easily at first. But then, I started noticing small oddities around the house. Some doors were locked, and I heard faint noises coming from the basement. Sarah's nervousness was becoming more apparent, and her eyes would dart towards the basement door every now and then. I asked her casually about the basement, trying to keep the conversation light. She laughed it off, saying it was just storage and nothing interesting. But the way she avoided eye contact and quickly changed the subject made my unease grow. The atmosphere became more oppressive, and I started feeling like I should leave, but I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. After dinner, Sarah insisted on showing me her interesting collection in the basement. Despite my growing wariness, I agreed, trying to maintain an air of casual curiosity. She led me to the basement door, and as she opened it, a musty, cold air wafted up. The dimly lit stairs descended into darkness, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back. We walked down the creaky wooden steps, the oppressive atmosphere growing heavier with each step. The basement was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw walls covered with newspaper clippings about disappearances and crimes. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the extent of what I was seeing. The clippings seemed to form a twisted collage of horror, detailing cases of missing persons and unsolved murders. As I stared at the walls covered in clippings, a sinking feeling of dread washed over me. Each article was meticulously cut out and pinned up, detailing chilling stories of disappearances and violent crimes. My eyes darted from one clipping to another, recognizing some of the faces from local news reports. It was then that I realized Sarah had some deep, dark obsession with these tragedies. The basement felt colder, and the air seemed thicker, suffocating me with fear. I turned to Sarah, hoping for some explanation that would make sense, but her expression had changed. The warm, inviting smile was replaced with a cold, calculating look. Her eyes were void of the warmth I thought I had seen before, and for the first time, I felt truly trapped. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly backed away, searching for the stairs. Before I could make a move towards the stairs, Sarah stepped closer, blocking my path. She began to speak in a calm, almost eerie tone, explaining how she found these stories fascinating and how they consumed her thoughts. Her words sent chills down my spine, each sentence revealing more of her disturbed psyche. She admitted to following these cases obsessively, sometimes even visiting the locations mentioned in the articles. I tried to keep my composure, pretending to be interested and understanding, but my mind was racing with thoughts of escape. I needed to get out of there, but any sudden movement might provoke her. As she continued talking, I inched closer to the stairs, hoping she wouldn't notice my intentions. Her gaze was fixed on me, making it difficult to hide my growing panic. Summoning all my courage, I made a sudden dash for the stairs. Sarah's reaction was swift. She lunged at me, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. I struggled to break free, my mind screaming in terror. The grip tightened, and I felt a surge of adrenaline that allowed me to wrench my arm away. I stumbled up the stairs, hearing her footsteps close behind. Reaching the top, I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I could hear her pounding on the door, her screams filled with rage. I raced to the front door, fumbling with the lock in my panic. The moment I got it open, I bolted outside and sprinted to my car, not daring to look back. The drive home was a blur, my heart racing and my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Once I was safely home, I immediately called the police. I explained everything that had happened, from the strange behavior to the horrifying discovery in the basement. They took my report seriously and assured me they would investigate. The fear that had gripped me in Sarah's house lingered, making it hard to sleep that night. Every noise made me jump, and the memory of her cold eyes haunted me. A few days later, I received a call from the police. They had investigated the house, but found no evidence of Sarah or the basement clippings I had described. It was as if she had vanished, taking all the evidence with her. The realization that she was still out there, somewhere, filled me with a deep sense of unease. I changed my locks and even considered moving, but no matter where I went, the fear followed me. The experience left me deeply scarred, and I found it difficult to trust people again. The memory of Sarah's house and the horrors within it stayed with me, a constant reminder of how close I had come to something truly evil. I deleted my Tinder account and avoided online dating altogether, the risk no longer worth the potential reward. The fear of being watched and the possibility of encountering someone like Sarah again haunted my every waking moment. Friends and family noticed the change in me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the full story. The encounter had shattered my sense of security, and I struggled to find peace. Even now, the sound of footsteps or a knock at the door can send me into a panic, the memory of that night never far from my mind. The house of horrors may be behind me, but its impact will haunt me forever. But wait, there's more. Brace yourself for the next spine-chilling tale. And if you're enjoying the scares, don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments. Story 3. A Tinder date turned chillingly silent and strange, leaving me with haunting memories and a disturbing revelation about his past. I had been using Tinder for a while, mostly to meet new people and have some fun dates. When I matched with Chris, I was intrigued by his charm and humor in our messages. He seemed like a genuinely nice guy, and we decided to meet up for dinner at a cozy, popular restaurant in the city. The evening started off normal enough. The restaurant was bustling with activity, filled with the sounds of clinking glasses and cheerful chatter. I arrived a bit early, nervous but excited about the date. When Chris walked in, he greeted me with a warm smile, but as soon as we sat down, something felt off. From the moment we were seated, Chris became uncharacteristically silent. I tried to engage him in conversation, asking about his day, his work, and his hobbies, but his responses were short and almost robotic. He barely looked at me, instead staring intently at his hands or the table. The lively atmosphere around us only highlighted the growing discomfort between us. As the dinner progressed, the silence became almost unbearable. I kept trying to break the ice, sharing funny anecdotes and asking more questions, but it felt like talking to a wall. Chris's intense, unblinking gaze was unnerving, and I started to regret agreeing to the date. The warmth and humor from our chats seemed to have vanished, replaced by an eerie stillness. Every attempt I made to lighten the mood was met with that same fixed stare. It was as if Chris was a completely different person from the one I had been chatting with online. My mind raced with thoughts. Was he nervous? Or was there something more sinister at play? The unsettling silence grew heavier with each passing minute. When the bill finally arrived, I breathed a sigh of relief, eager to end the uncomfortable evening. As the waiter left, Chris leaned in closer, breaking the silence for the first time in what felt like hours. His face was just inches from mine, and he whispered, "You look a lot like my ex-girlfriend." His tone was soft, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way he said it. My heart pounded in my chest as a chill ran down my spine. I forced a smile, trying to mask my growing fear, and quickly suggested we call it a night. Chris's words echoed in my mind, amplifying the sense of dread that had been building throughout the evening. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in danger. The ride home was filled with nervous glances over my shoulder. Every shadow seemed threatening, every passerby suspicious. As soon as I got home, I blocked Chris on all platforms, my hands shaking as I did. I couldn't believe how quickly the date had turned from promising to terrifying. The next day, I couldn't get the date out of my mind. Something about Chris's whisper and his fixed stare bothered me deeply. I decided to do a little digging online, curious about his ex-girlfriend. To my horror, I discovered news articles about a woman who had mysteriously disappeared months earlier. Her picture was eerily similar to mine. Reading the details of her case, I felt a wave of nausea. The realization hit me hard. Chris had not only been acting strange, but he might be involved in something much darker. The thought that I could have been his next target left me feeling violated and terrified. I reached out to the authorities, sharing my experience and the information I found. Since that night, I've been living with a heightened sense of fear and paranoia. The knowledge that I might have narrowly escaped a dangerous situation keeps me up at night. I constantly look over my shoulder, and the memory of Chris's fixed stare haunts my dreams. The once exciting world of online dating now feels like a minefield, and I tread with extreme caution. The days following the date were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. Every noise in my apartment seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. I couldn't shake the feeling that Chris was still watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications, each one making my heart race. I had blocked Chris, but the fear that he might find another way to contact me gnawed at my sanity. I found myself looking over my shoulder wherever I went. The supermarket, my workplace, even my own home felt unsafe. I installed additional locks on my doors and windows, but the sense of security they provided was fleeting. My friends noticed my jumpiness, and I confided in them about my date with Chris. They were supportive but suggested I might be overreacting. Deep down, I knew they couldn't understand the depth of my fear. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Each night, I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening for any signs of an intruder. The darkness was suffocating, and my mind played cruel tricks on me, conjuring images of Chris standing over my bed, his cold eyes piercing through the night. The exhaustion only heightened my paranoia, creating a vicious cycle I couldn't escape. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a knock at the door. My heart leaped into my throat. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the fear of who might be on the other side paralyzed me. The knocking continued, more insistent this time. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my hands trembling, and approached the door slowly. Peering through the peephole, I saw a delivery man standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers. Reluctantly, I opened the door a crack and asked who they were from. The delivery man handed me a card and left. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, revealing a handwritten note. "Thinking of you, Chris." The knife clattered to the floor as I collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down my face. How had he found me? I called the police, but they said there was little they could do without evidence of a direct threat. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, constantly on edge, waiting for Chris to make his next move. Desperation drove me to seek professional help. I found a therapist who specialized in trauma and stalking cases. During our sessions, I poured out my fears and anxieties, reliving every detail of my encounter with Chris. The therapist helped me understand that my reactions were normal given the circumstances and provided strategies to manage my paranoia. We worked on grounding techniques to keep me in the present moment and reduce the constant fear. I learned to challenge my intrusive thoughts and differentiate between real threats and my mind playing tricks on me. Slowly, I began to regain a semblance of control over my life, but the shadow of Chris's presence still loomed large. My therapist also recommended joining a support group for stalking victims. Sharing my story with others who had experienced similar fears was both comforting and empowering. I realized I wasn't alone in this nightmare, and together, we could support each other in the journey toward healing. Months passed, and though the intensity of my fear had diminished, it never fully disappeared. One evening, as I returned home from a support group meeting, I noticed a figure standing in the shadows near my apartment. Panic surged through me, but this time, I refused to be paralyzed by fear. I took out my phone and called the police, describing the situation as calmly as I could. The figure stepped into the light, and my blood ran cold. It was Chris, his eyes locked onto mine, a twisted smile on his face. I backed away slowly, trying to keep a safe distance. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice trembling. Chris took a step closer, and I could see the madness in his eyes. "You can't escape me," he said, his voice a chilling whisper. The sound of sirens in the distance was the most welcome noise I had ever heard. Chris turned and ran, disappearing into the night. The police arrived moments later, and I gave them a detailed description of Chris and the months of torment I had endured. They promised to increase patrols in my area and took my case more seriously than before. The final confrontation had left me shaken, but it also reinforced my determination to take back control of my life. In the weeks following the confrontation, I took decisive steps to reclaim my sense of safety. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of town, one with better security and a supportive community. The move was stressful, but the fresh start was exactly what I needed to begin the healing process. My new neighborhood offered a sense of anonymity and peace that I hadn't felt in months. I continued my therapy sessions and remained active in the support group, finding strength in the shared experiences and resilience of others. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece, always mindful of the lessons I had learned. Though the memories of Chris and the terror he inflicted will never completely fade, I have learned to live with them. I am more cautious now, but I refuse to let fear dictate my life. The experience taught me the importance of vigilance and self-care, and I am determined to move forward, stronger and wiser. The silent date will always be a part of my story, but it no longer defines me. Think you can handle more? Here comes the next bone-chilling account. Subscribe and drop a comment if you're still watching. Story 4. The chilling realization that the seemingly perfect date has a dark side, turning a fun night into a nightmare. Meeting someone from Tinder always carries a mix of excitement and nervousness. When I matched with Mark, he seemed charming and interesting, so I was genuinely looking forward to our date. We agreed to meet at a trendy bar downtown, and I spent hours picking out the perfect outfit, wanting to make a good impression. The bar was bustling with energy, filled with the hum of conversations and clinking glasses. Mark was waiting for me at a corner table, and our initial interaction was smooth and comfortable. We laughed, shared stories, and even found out we had a few mutual friends. The evening felt perfect, and I thought I had finally found someone special. As the night wore on, Mark's insistence on walking me home grew increasingly uncomfortable. Despite my polite decline, explaining that I preferred to take a cab, he persisted. "It's not safe for a woman to be out alone at night," he said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The more he insisted, the more uneasy I felt. When I finally managed to convince him that I'd be fine, I left the bar and hailed a cab. To my dismay, Mark followed me outside, watching as I got into the car. I tried to shrug off the creeping feeling of dread, telling myself he was just being overly protective. But as the cab pulled away, I noticed his car trailing behind, a dark silhouette against the city lights. The ride home felt interminable. Every time I glanced back, his car was there, maintaining a steady distance. I texted a friend, hoping for some comfort, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. By the time we reached my apartment, my heart was pounding in my chest. When I arrived home, Mark's car was still parked on the street, just a few houses down. Panic surged through me as I fumbled with my keys, rushing to get inside. Once safely behind the locked door, I peered through the window and saw him sitting in his car, staring intently at my building. His presence felt like a dark cloud hanging over me, suffocating and persistent. I decided to call the police, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. They arrived swiftly, questioning Mark about his intentions. He seemed calm, almost too calm, as he explained that he was just making sure I got home safely. His demeanor was unnerving, and the officers weren't entirely convinced by his explanation. As they continued to question him, the police discovered something alarming. Mark had a history of obsessive behavior and stalking, with several complaints filed against him in the past. My stomach churned with fear and disgust as the officers revealed this information to me. It felt like I had narrowly escaped a dangerous situation. The police advised me to get a restraining order, explaining that Mark's past behavior indicated a pattern that could escalate. The shock and fear were overwhelming, and I felt a deep sense of violation. How could someone so seemingly normal have such a dark history? The realization was chilling, and I struggled to process it. I followed the police's advice, taking immediate steps to ensure my safety. The process of getting the restraining order was daunting, filled with legal jargon and court appearances. Each step felt like reliving the nightmare, but I knew it was necessary to protect myself. The emotional toll was heavy, but the support from the officers and my friends helped me push through. The restraining order provided some relief, but the fear didn't dissipate entirely. The knowledge of Mark's history left a lasting impact, making me constantly wary and cautious. The ordeal was a stark reminder of how easily someone can hide their true nature behind a charming facade. Since then, I have been much more careful about who I trust, especially when it comes to online dating. After the police incident, I hope to return to a sense of normalcy, but the nightmares began almost immediately. Each night, I would see Mark's face in my dreams, his eyes boring into mine with a sinister intensity. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The nights were long and filled with fear, and the lack of sleep started to affect my daily life. The nightmares weren't the only problem. During the day, I constantly felt like someone was following me. Every time I walked down the street, I found myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see Mark's car creeping along behind me. The sense of paranoia was overwhelming, and it felt like I could never escape his presence. My friends and family tried to reassure me, but the fear had taken root deep inside me. I began to change my routines, hoping to avoid any potential encounters. I took different routes to work, avoided places I used to frequent, and stopped going out at night altogether. Despite these precautions, the anxiety never fully went away. The constant vigilance was exhausting, and I felt like a prisoner in my own life. One evening, a few weeks after the police incident, I decided to go out with a group of friends to a new restaurant. I thought that being in a public place with people I trusted would help ease my anxiety. The night started off well, and for a while, I managed to relax and enjoy myself. However, as the evening wore on, I began to feel uneasy again. While we were sitting at our table, I noticed a familiar face at the bar. My heart sank as I realized it was Mark. He hadn't seen me yet, but the sight of him sent a wave of panic through my body. I quickly informed my friends, and we decided to leave immediately. As we hurried out of the restaurant, I glanced back and saw Mark watching us, a knowing smile on his face. The encounter shattered any illusion of safety I had managed to build. It was clear that Mark wasn't going to let go easily. The realization was terrifying, and I felt a renewed sense of urgency to protect myself. The restraining order seemed like a flimsy shield against someone so determined. My friends offered their support, but the fear of another encounter was ever present. Desperate for a solution, I decided to seek professional help. I contacted a therapist who specialized in trauma and stalking cases. During our sessions, I shared everything that had happened, from the initial date to the terrifying encounters that followed. Talking about it was painful, but it was also a relief to have someone understand my fear and offer guidance. The therapist helped me develop strategies to cope with the anxiety and nightmares. She also advised me on additional safety measures I could take, such as installing security cameras and informing my neighbors about the situation. These steps provided a sense of control, even if they couldn't completely eliminate the fear. Despite the progress in therapy, the sense of being hunted never fully went away. The sessions were a reminder that I wasn't alone in my struggle, but the fear was still a constant companion. Each day was a battle to maintain my sanity and reclaim my sense of safety. The support from my therapist and loved ones was invaluable, but the shadow of Mark's presence loomed large. One night, as I was returning home from work, I noticed a car parked down the street. It was the same make and model as Mark's, and my heart began to race. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, but the fear was too strong. As I approached my house, the car's headlights flashed, and I saw Mark sitting inside, watching me. Panic surged through me, but I knew I had to act quickly. I ran to my front door, fumbling with my keys as Mark got out of his car and started walking toward me. I managed to get inside and lock the door just as he reached the porch. Through the peephole, I saw him standing there, a sinister smile on his face. I called the police, my hands shaking as I explained the situation. They arrived within minutes, but by then, Mark had disappeared. The officers took my statement and promised to increase patrols in my neighborhood. The incident left me shaken, but it also strengthened my resolve to fight back. I refused to let Mark control my life any longer. With the help of my therapist and the support of my friends and family, I began to take steps toward reclaiming my life. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city, hoping to put some distance between myself and the fear that had haunted me for so long. The new place felt like a fresh start, and for the first time in months, I began to feel a glimmer of hope. I continued my therapy, focusing on building my confidence and resilience. The nightmares still came occasionally, but they were less frequent and less intense. I started to go out more, slowly rebuilding my social life and finding joy in the little things again. The journey wasn't easy, but each day felt like a step toward healing. The experience left a lasting impact, and I remained cautious in my interactions with others, especially online. However, I refused to let fear dictate my life. The support from my loved ones and the progress I made in therapy gave me the strength to move forward. While the memory of Mark's stalking would always be a part of my story, it no longer defined me. Story 5. A Tinder invitation leads to a chilling discovery and a narrow escape from a nightmarish party. Meeting new people through Tinder had always been an exciting venture for me. The thrill of getting to know someone new, the anticipation of a potential connection, and the hope of a memorable experience kept me swiping. When I matched with Sarah, she seemed like the perfect combination of fun and interesting. Our chats were engaging, and she quickly suggested meeting up. After a few weeks, she invited me to a party at her house. The idea of attending a party at her place sounded thrilling. I imagined a lively gathering, filled with interesting people and good vibes. The anticipation built up as the day approached, and I couldn't wait to meet Sarah in person. Little did I know, this night would turn into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. As I arrived at Sarah's house, something felt off. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, and her house, though well-maintained, seemed unusually empty. I knocked on the door, and Sarah greeted me with a warm smile. She led me inside, and I quickly realized we were alone. "The party's downstairs," she said, motioning towards the basement door. Her calm demeanor did little to ease my growing unease. Walking through the house, I noticed how pristine everything looked, almost too perfect. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Sarah's behavior seemed normal enough, but there was a strange tension in the air. As we approached the basement door, my gut told me something was terribly wrong. Reluctantly, I followed Sarah down the narrow staircase into the dimly lit basement. The further we descended, the heavier the atmosphere became. At the bottom, a group of people stood in a circle, all dressed in peculiar, almost ceremonial clothing. Their eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity, and the room fell silent as we entered. The basement was dimly lit, with shadows dancing on the walls. The air was thick with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. My heart raced as I took in the sight of the strange group, their expressions unreadable. Sarah stood by my side, her smile now a distant memory. I felt a wave of panic wash over me, but I tried to stay calm. The people in the basement were unlike anyone I had ever seen. Their clothes were outdated and peculiar, and their faces were expressionless. They stood in complete silence, their eyes never leaving me. I tried to strike up a conversation, but their responses were cryptic and unsettling. It felt as though they were speaking in code, their words laced with hidden meanings. The more I observed them, the more my unease grew. Their silence was deafening, and their stares felt like they were piercing through my soul. I glanced at Sarah, hoping for some explanation, but her demeanor had changed. She seemed to be one of them, her eyes cold and distant. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I needed to get out of there, and fast. My mind raced as I searched for an excuse to leave. I felt trapped, and the group's presence became more oppressive by the second. The small, disturbing details in the basement added to my fear. Strange symbols on the walls, flickering candles, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Sarah's transformation from a friendly match to a sinister accomplice was terrifying. I told Sarah I needed to use the bathroom and began to plan my escape. As I made my way to the door, the group's behavior intensified. Their stares became more focused, and the whispers grew louder. It was as if they sensed my intentions and were trying to prevent me from leaving. My pulse quickened, and I knew I had to act fast before it was too late. Summoning every ounce of courage, I made a dash for the stairs. The oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing in the basement. I could feel the group's eyes on me, and their whispers grew louder as I ascended. My heart pounded, and I feared they might try to stop me. Reaching the top of the stairs, I fumbled with the door handle, my hands shaking. With my heart in my throat, I made my way to the bathroom, trying to appear calm. Once inside, I locked the door and took a moment to collect myself. My mind raced as I realized the gravity of the situation. This was no ordinary party, and these people were not harmless strangers. I needed to get out, but the thought of facing them again was terrifying. I took a deep breath and opened the door, my eyes scanning for an escape route. The group was still there, their eyes following my every move. I forced a smile and made an excuse about needing to leave early. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel their eyes boring into my back as I made my way to the stairs. I had to stay calm and act natural, but inside, I was panicking. Summoning every ounce of courage, I made a dash for the stairs. The oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing in the basement. I could feel the group's eyes on me, and their whispers grew louder as I ascended. My heart pounded, and I feared they might try to stop me. Reaching the top of the stairs, I fumbled with the door handle, my hands shaking. The oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing in the basement. I could feel the group's eyes on me, and their whispers grew louder as I ascended. My heart pounded, and I feared they might try to stop me. Reaching the top of the stairs, I fumbled with the door handle, my hands shaking. Finally, the door swung open, and I burst into the main part of the house. I didn't look back as I sprinted for the front door, my mind focused solely on escape. As I reached the porch, I heard footsteps behind me. Panic surged through me, but I managed to get to my car and lock the doors. With trembling hands, I started the engine and sped away, my heart racing and my mind reeling. Back home, I couldn't shake the terror of that night. The faces of the people in the basement and Sarah's cold demeanor haunted me. I spent hours researching the area, trying to understand what I had stumbled into. To my horror, I found reports of several people who had disappeared after attending parties in that neighborhood. The realization that I had narrowly escaped a similar fate was chilling. Summoning every ounce of courage, I made a dash for the stairs. The oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing in the basement. I could feel the group's eyes on me, and their whispers grew louder as I ascended. My heart pounded, and I feared they might try to stop me. Reaching the top of the stairs, I fumbled with the door handle, my hands shaking. Finally, the door swung open, and I burst into the main part of the house. I didn't look back as I sprinted for the front door, my mind focused solely on escape. As I reached the porch, I heard footsteps behind me. Panic surged through me, but I managed to get to my car and lock the doors. With trembling hands, I started the engine and sped away, my heart racing and my mind reeling. Back home, I couldn't shake the terror of that night. The faces of the people in the basement and Sarah's cold demeanor haunted me. I spent hours researching the area, trying to understand what I had stumbled into. To my horror, I found reports of several people who had disappeared after attending parties in that neighborhood. The realization that I had narrowly escaped a similar fate was chilling. The ordeal taught me a valuable lesson about online dating and the dangers of trusting strangers too quickly. I became much more cautious, always meeting new people in public places and never accepting invitations to private locations. The memory of that night was a constant reminder to trust my instincts and prioritize my safety. I shared my story with friends and family, warning them about the potential risks of online dating. The support and understanding from my loved ones helped me regain my sense of security. While the fear never completely went away, I learned to navigate the world with a heightened awareness and a stronger resolve to stay safe. The sinister invitation had left its mark, but it also made me wiser and more resilient. The experience made me reflect on how easily we can be lulled into a false sense of security by the allure of new connections. The dark underbelly of seemingly innocent interactions is a reminder that vigilance is crucial. I vowed to always trust my instincts and be mindful of the signals that often go unnoticed in the excitement of new relationships. The lesson I learned from this harrowing experience is one that will stay with me for the rest of my life. Trusting strangers too quickly, especially through online platforms, can have dire consequences. I became much more cautious, always meeting new people in public places and never accepting invitations to private locations. The memory of that night was a constant reminder to trust my instincts and prioritize my safety. I shared my story with friends and family, warning them about the potential risks of online dating. The support and understanding from my loved ones helped me regain my sense of security. While the fear never completely went away, I learned to navigate the world with a heightened awareness and a stronger resolve to stay safe. The sinister invitation had left its mark, but it also made me wiser and more resilient. The experience made me reflect on how easily we can be lulled into a false sense of security by the allure of new connections. The dark underbelly of seemingly innocent interactions is a reminder that vigilance is crucial. I vowed to always trust my instincts and be mindful of the signals that often go unnoticed in the excitement of new relationships. Story 6. Meeting someone online can seem perfect, but sometimes What seems too good to be true hides a chilling reality. My experience with a seemingly perfect Tinder match turned into a nightmare that still haunts me. I had been using Tinder for a few months, looking to meet someone interesting. One day, I matched with a woman named Emily. She was stunning, successful, and shared many of my interests. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and she seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about our favorite books, travel destinations, and even our career aspirations. After a few weeks of chatting, we decided it was time to meet in person. Emily suggested a fancy restaurant downtown, one I had always wanted to try but never had the chance. I was excited and a bit nervous. The night of our date, I dressed my best and made my way to the restaurant. I arrived early, eager to make a good impression and looking forward to finally meeting the woman who seemed like a perfect match. I arrived at the restaurant about 15 minutes early and took a seat at a cozy table near the window. As I waited, I ordered a drink to calm my nerves. The minutes ticked by, and soon it was our agreed meeting time. But there was no sign of Emily. I checked my phone to see if there were any messages from her, but there was nothing. I told myself she might be running a bit late and decided to wait a bit longer. As the minutes turned into an hour, my initial excitement faded into confusion and disappointment. The waitress came by a few times, giving me sympathetic looks as I assured her I was still waiting for someone. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, realizing I had been stood up. I finished my drink and left the restaurant, feeling a mix of embarrassment and frustration. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment. I checked Tinder to see if Emily had sent any messages explaining why she hadn't shown up. To my surprise, her profile had been deleted. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. I tried not to overthink it, convincing myself that maybe she had a good reason for not showing up and deactivating her account. However, as the days went by, I couldn't help but feel that something was off. The entire situation was strange, and the sudden disappearance of her profile only added to the mystery. I started to second-guess everything, wondering if I had missed any red flags in our conversations. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. A few days after the failed date, I received an anonymous message on my phone. The message described exactly what I was wearing on the night of the date and even mentioned the drink I had ordered. My heart raced as I read the message, realizing that someone had been watching me that night. The thought of being watched without knowing it sent chills down my spine. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe it was a prank by someone who had seen me at the restaurant. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The level of detail in the message was too precise to be a coincidence. I felt a growing sense of fear and paranoia, unsure of who was behind the messages and what their intentions were. As days passed, the messages became more frequent and disturbing. They described my daily activities with unnerving accuracy. Whoever was sending these messages knew my every move. The messages started to include personal details that I had never shared online, like my morning routine and the route I took to work. I began to feel constantly watched, and the sense of invasion grew unbearable. I stopped going out unless absolutely necessary, fearing I might encounter my stalker. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. The messages were now threatening, suggesting that the sender knew where I lived and worked. I felt trapped in my own life, unable to escape the invisible eyes that followed me everywhere. One night, I received a message that pushed me over the edge. It included a photo of my front door, taken from outside my house. The realization that my stalker had been to my home was too much to bear. I felt an overwhelming sense of fear and vulnerability. I knew I couldn't continue living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder and jumping at every sound. I decided to call the police, hoping they could help me identify the person behind the messages. They took my case seriously and advised me to change all my passwords and be cautious about my online presence. They also suggested installing security cameras around my house and changing my phone number to prevent further harassment. Following the police's advice, I changed all my passwords and deleted all my social media accounts. I installed security cameras around my home and even got a new phone number. Despite these precautions, the fear of being watched never left me. I was constantly on edge, feeling that someone was still out there, keeping tabs on me. The police investigation didn't yield any results. They couldn't trace the messages back to anyone specific, and I was left with more questions than answers. My life had changed dramatically, and I struggled to regain a sense of normalcy. The once exciting world of online dating had become a source of terror and paranoia. Even after taking all possible measures to protect myself, the experience left a lasting impact. I found it hard to trust people, especially those I met online. The sense of invasion and fear became a permanent part of my life. I often had nightmares about being watched and followed, waking up in a cold sweat. My social life suffered as I became more reclusive, avoiding social gatherings and new acquaintances. The fear of encountering my stalker again overshadowed every aspect of my life. I constantly questioned my decisions, wondering if I could ever feel safe again. With time, the fear began to diminish, but it never completely disappeared. I slowly started to rebuild my life, making new friends and cautiously stepping back into the world of dating. However, I approached everything with a heightened sense of caution. I was always on the lookout for any signs of trouble, never letting my guard down completely. The experience taught me valuable lessons about online safety and the importance of protecting personal information. While the memories of the dark period lingered, I refused to let it define my future. I moved forward with a renewed sense of vigilance, determined to live my life without fear, but with the awareness of the dangers that lurk in the digital world. Story 7. I met a man on Tinder who seemed perfect, charming, attentive, and genuinely interested in me. After a few dates, he invited me to his house, and what I discovered there left me terrified and questioning everything I thought I knew about him. I had been using Tinder for a few months, hoping to find someone who shared my interests and values. That's when I matched with Mark. He was attractive, well-spoken, and had a great sense of humor. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and it wasn't long before we decided to meet in person. Our first few dates were magical. We went to nice restaurants, took long walks in the park, and spent hours talking about our lives and dreams. Mark seemed like the ideal partner, thoughtful, kind, and always attentive. When he invited me to his house for dinner, I felt comfortable and excited to spend more time with him. Mark's house was just as charming as he was. It was a cozy, well-decorated place that felt welcoming. As we sat down to eat, I couldn't help but feel that everything was going perfectly. After dinner, Mark suggested we move to the living room where he had a surprise for me. Little did I know, this surprise would change everything. Mark led me to a room at the back of the house. The atmosphere shifted slightly as we approached the door, and I felt a chill run down my spine. He opened the door and motioned for me to enter first. The room was dimly lit, with shelves lining the walls and a large desk in the center. As I walked in, I noticed the shelves were filled with photo albums, trinkets, and various personal items. Mark seemed excited as he explained that this was his memory room, where he kept mementos from his past relationships. At first, it seemed sweet, but as I looked closer, the feeling of unease grew. Each shelf was meticulously organized, with photos of women and small items like locks of hair, pieces of jewelry, and handwritten notes. The more I looked, the more I felt like I was intruding on something deeply private and unsettling. Mark's demeanor remained calm and proud, which only added to my discomfort. As I continued to examine the items, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The photos were not just casual snapshots. They were intimate, often taken without the women's knowledge. The personal items were eerie trophies, and I realized that Mark had been collecting these mementos obsessively. My heart pounded as I saw a small section dedicated to me. There were photos from our dates, including ones I didn't remember being taken. There was even a strand of my hair, carefully placed in a small frame. The realization hit me like a wave. Mark had been keeping track of me in ways I hadn't noticed. I turned to Mark, trying to keep my voice steady, and asked him why he kept these things. His smile faded, and a cold, detached look took over his face. He said it was his way of preserving memories, but his tone was void of any warmth. Fear gripped me as I made an excuse to leave, trying to hide my panic. I told Mark that I needed to use the restroom, hoping to buy myself some time to think. Once inside, I locked the door and took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't want to arouse his suspicion. After a few minutes, I composed myself and walked back out, forcing a smile. Mark was waiting for me, his eyes following my every move. I thanked him for dinner and said I had an early morning, making my way towards the front door. As I reached for the handle, Mark stepped closer, his presence looming. He asked if I had enjoyed the evening, his voice tinged with an unsettling calmness. I nodded and quickly opened the door, stepping outside and breathing in the cool night air. I walked briskly to my car, feeling Mark's eyes on me the entire time. As soon as I got in, I locked the doors and drove away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I couldn't stop thinking about that room and the feeling of being watched. After leaving Mark's house, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed ominous, every sound suspicious. I tried to go about my daily life, but the memory of the memory room haunted me. I kept my curtains closed and avoided going out alone. I was constantly on edge, fearing that Mark might be stalking me. A few days later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small box containing a locket I had once worn on our date and a note that read, "To remember us by." My heart sank. The idea that he had been in my house and taken my things without me knowing was terrifying. I decided to call the police and report the incident, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't do much. Despite the lack of action from the authorities, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and even bought a guard dog. But the feeling of unease persisted. Mark's obsession had instilled a deep sense of paranoia in me, and I couldn't rest until I knew I was truly safe. Feeling desperate, I decided to confront Mark. I needed to understand why he had done this, and to make it clear that he should stay away from me. I drove to his house, rehearsing what I would say. As I approached, my heart pounded, and my palms were sweaty. When I knocked on the door, there was no answer. I peered through the windows but saw no sign of him. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a car pulling into the driveway. Mark stepped out, surprised to see me. His expression quickly turned to one of concern. I told him we needed to talk, and he invited me in. Once inside, I demanded an explanation for the room and the creepy package. Mark's demeanor shifted. He seemed defensive and almost amused by my accusations. He claimed that the memory room was harmless and that the package was just a misunderstanding, but his explanations did little to ease my fears. I could see the darkness in his eyes, and I knew he was not telling the whole truth. Realizing I wouldn't get the answers I sought, I warned him to stay away from me and left, feeling more unsettled than ever. Despite my warnings, the stalking didn't stop. I started noticing Mark's car parked near my house and him lurking around my workplace. I documented every incident, taking photos and writing down dates and times. I went back to the police with this evidence, but they still couldn't do much without more concrete proof of harassment or threats. The situation reached a breaking point when I found another package on my doorstep, this time containing a framed photo of me sleeping, taken from inside my bedroom. The sheer violation of my privacy sent me into a panic. I realized that Mark had broken into my house again, and this time, he had gotten dangerously close. I decided to take a leave of absence from work and stay with a friend for a while. But even at my friend's house, I couldn't escape the fear. I installed more security measures and kept my phone close, ready to call for help at any moment. The constant dread was overwhelming, and I knew I had to find a way to end this nightmare. Desperate for help, I reached out to a private investigator. I shared my story and all the evidence I had collected. The investigator took my case seriously and began digging into Mark's background. What he found was chilling. Mark had a history of stalking and harassing women, but he had never been caught or charged with any crimes. With this new information, I went back to the police. This time, They issued a temporary restraining order against Mark and increased patrols around my house. The investigator also provided me with practical advice on how to stay safe and avoid being tracked. I started feeling a glimmer of hope, believing that I could finally regain control of my life. But the fear didn't completely disappear. Every time I stepped outside, I looked over my shoulder, expecting to see Mark. I kept my phone on speed dial, ready to call for help at any moment. The investigator's support and the restraining order were comforting, but I knew I had to remain vigilant to protect myself. With the restraining order in place and the police monitoring the situation, Mark eventually backed off. The harassment stopped, and I slowly began to rebuild my sense of security. However, the psychological scars remained. I continued to live with a heightened sense of caution, always aware of my surroundings. I moved to a new city and changed my contact information, hoping to start fresh. The memory of Mark's memory room and his obsession haunted me, but I refused to let it control my life. I joined a support group for stalking survivors, where I found solace in sharing my story and hearing others' experiences. Despite the resolution, the fear never completely went away. I remained cautious in my interactions, especially with people I met online. The experience taught me valuable lessons about trust and vigilance. While I managed to escape the nightmare, the shadow of Mark's obsession lingered, reminding me of the darkness that can hide behind a seemingly perfect facade.